And I am very glad to present the first lecturer of the afternoon session, Stefan Lowe, Senior Executive Architect of City Architects Division from Dublin City Council. And he will present a project called a Dolphin House. So Stefan, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Ruta, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be taking part in this conference. As I was saying to Ruta just a minute ago, it kind of emphasizes the importance of the kind of community of Europe, especially in current times and what's happening in Ukraine. And I was very taken with with Elena's presentation, and especially the positivity that's coming out of it. So what I'd like to describe is a project that I worked on a number of years ago. It was completed in 2018. It's as part of a regeneration of the housing scheme in the south of Dublin City. This is an aerial view of the Dolphin House estate. It was an estate built in the 1950s. It's made up of a series of U-shaped blocks and contains 392 apartments and a couple of linear blocks to the north of the site. And then as well, there were 44 senior citizen units as well, located in a series of blocks along the north of the site as well. What happened was in the Celtic Tiger era, there was a development in terms of governmental decision to do a lot of regeneration and improvements of housing schemes using a public-private partnership model. And the idea was that basically public land would be sold to developers, and in return they would build a number of social units on behalf of the government, on behalf of local authorities, and the rest of the land would then be used by them for private housing. And this was basically the model that was planned for a lot of our larger housing schemes in Dublin City Council. Now, what happened then is shortly afterwards, in the crash of 2008, basically all the developers went into liquidation. And so there were a lot of sites that were left either half-finished or unfinished or not started. And in terms of Dolphin House, what had happened was no work had started, which was actually a positive because it meant the whole community was still intact. Because what had actually happened on a lot of other sites is because there were proposals for complete demolition and new build, the existing residents were moved out temporarily. But as you know yourself, once people move into new accommodation, be it temporarily, they never come back. So a lot of communities were actually relocated and destroyed as a result. But the community in Dolphin remained intact and was a very strong and unified community. But what happened was also because of the PPP, what happened was there was a kind of a slowing down in terms of upkeep and maintenance of the blocks, because the idea was, well, these blocks are going to be demolished in a few years, so we don't need to do as much maintenance. So as a result, the conditions actually ended up in some of the flats were really terrible. There were lots of problems with damp and mold that were manifesting themselves. This was due to the fabric, the lack of insulation, and poor ventilation. So as a result of this, the community kind of got together and started talking to the council, and there was a large amount of consultation about the best way forwards. So the proposal was then to set up a complete regeneration of the whole Dolphin estate. And that's basically the first phase of this is what I'm describing today. This is the map, site plan of the Dolphin House estate. There's only one entrance point into the estate, as quite common with Dublin City Council housing estates, which pretty much ends up then developing as a kind of a ghetto. It's like a no-go area, so unless you're from the estate, nobody else goes in there, which can cause a lot of social issues. The second thing was there's a series of 8-story blocks on the south of the U-shaped blocks here, which are facing onto the canal here on the south and the south facing, so it's actually a really wonderful aspect. But they were actually turning their back onto the canal. Their entrance was actually facing onto this, which is a car parking area to the north. Furthermore, there were kind of large green spaces in between the blocks here, but even though they were very generous in size, they were not used. The ground floors of the existing blocks, even though they had windows looking out, there were no double doors, there's no access onto these green areas, so they were completely underutilised. So as I said, there was consultation between the residents, between Dublin City Council and between the Department of Housing, who fund social housing, in terms of the best way forward. There were a number of proposals we went through. The first one was basically just to do like a minor refurbishment, refurbishing existing flats, doing dry lining and the like, but that was kind of thrown out. The second one was then the complete demolition and new build. But given the time that it was just after the 2008 crash, there wasn't much money around. The view of the Department of Housing was that retrofit would actually be more better value for money. So the proposal was to proceed then with a mixture of retrofit and then adding some new builds as well to get a little bit of additionality. The proposal as well in terms of using the new blocks was to actually create green spaces, to utilise the green spaces between the blocks to make them into private courtyards. Finally, the proposal was to actually demolish these blocks along the canal and to create new rows of housing which actually face onto the canal and make use of the good orientation. In consultation with the residents, and a new master plan was drawn up. It was a mix of retrofit and new build. In the plan here, kind of the beige blocks were the existing blocks which were to be retrofitted. And then to the north, then there were new buildings to be built, which would then enclose the previously underutilised green spaces to form private courtyards for the residents. And then on the south side, the existing three-storey blocks would be demolished and a new terrace of houses would be built facing onto the canal to provide more ownership and more supervision of the actual canal path. In addition, there was also access, then a new access road will be created here to the south as well to allow people to actually access their houses. With the remainder of the site, then there were kind of proposals for new build. These locations are kind of the open spaces. There wasn't anything built on there. And then with more housing just along the edge to match the existing housing at the edge of the site. It was proposed also then to have more openings to create a new road from the street along here and another opening over here as well to create more permeability through the site to connect the estate much more with the wider area, to make it more part of the wider area by connecting streets and not so isolated, not so much of a ghetto. This is kind of the first phase of the master plan. In the proposal, the 63 of the existing units were to be retrofitted, and then in the new builds, then there were 37 new builds to the north and the south of the existing blocks, making 100 in total, made up of 91 apartments and 9 houses. In terms of design, the existing blocks were done what's called the Sims style. Herbert Sims was a city architect who ran Dublin Corporation, now Dublin City Council, in the 1930s, and responsible for a large amount of new buildings, especially apartments. He was very much influenced by the English School of Social Housing at the time, which was in turn influenced by the Dutch School of Architecture. There were some very fine schemes he designed in the 1930s. His style was kind of was moved on in the 1950s and 60s, but it was a much more stripped back style where there were less features. However, in coming up with the design, I was conscious that whatever the new build were, that it shouldn't be completely contrasting to the existing blocks. It was kind of just, it felt like there was something just placed there totally out of keeping. So in terms of looking at the existing, I wanted in some stage or other to make the new blocks and the old blocks blend into to form a whole, kind of a unity. So in looking at that, I looked at some of the features of the existing blocks in terms of the overhanging roofs, some horizontal banding, and also there was a motif to an arched doorway, which is actually quite common in a lot of Dublin City Council housing schemes of this era. So I thought I'd reuse that just as a motif in the new development. In looking at some of the design, I was also conscious of some of the previous examples of in Dutch school. For example, in the entrance, I wanted to kind of make a prominent opening here in the entrance block here, and it was kind of some sort of was back here to Jan Wies's Olympic Stadium in Amsterdam. And in the 2-story houses we have in the new development as well, there's kind of a little bit of a throwback to some of JPU housing in the Werkbund. So these are the elevations then of the proposed development. The proposal for the existing blocks was in order to improve their fabric that we would externally insulate them. And in order then to match the new and the old proposal, was the ground floor then would have kind of brick slips on it, similar to the brick of the new build, to try and match it all together. In addition, by building on the north and the south of the open green spaces to form a kind of internal courtyard, which would be very private and very secure for the residents. The security was kind of a big issue in consultation with residents, because there's a lot of antisocial behaviour kind of occurring within the estate. Then the elevation of the house towards the canal, I was kind of conscious of maintaining the scale of the existing apartments, with 4 stories, so I proposed 3-story houses, but in order to provide good orientation, there's single-story elements to allow good sunlight into the rear gardens. These are then just some cross sections again through the proposed development, showing how the new build development then encloses courtyards in conjunction with the existing blocks. This is then just a detail of the original drawings we had from the existing blocks. The construction was made up of a framed concrete structure. The walls themselves are actually solid masonry. Now, there were issues then in terms of cold bridging, both at the overhanging roofs, at intermediate balconies, and also there was a curious situation of a semi-basement here, which was also kind of provided difficulties in terms of how best to deal with insulating it. In terms of the existing block, there were existing chimneys in place which were redundant. And there was also then some water tanks on the roof as well, which were actually subject to a lot of antisocial behaviour as well. Children used to climb up on the balconies onto the roof and used to store needles and that there. So there was a lot of issues with those. So the proposal was just to remove all of those, which would then allow for a kind of a clean slate for insulating the roof. In addition, the existing walkways and balconies then would be removed and new walkways inserted to again remove potential of cold bridging once the walls were insulated. This is then a 3D of a typical block. The existing blocks have internal staircases. They were open, and there was a lot of antisocial behaviour occurring on them. Occasionally, you'd kind of be walking up, and there'd be people drug dealing and whatever on them. So the proposal was to create a new staircase and also provide a lift, which would be secure for the residents. But by introducing a lift, it also meant that if anybody had kind of mobility issues or was in a wheelchair, they could, for the first time, actually access all of the units on all of the floors. And the existing walkways were replaced with new steel frame walkways, which were separate from the structure of the blocks as well, to cut out cold bridging. And then to the rear, for the first time, balconies were introduced to the individual apartments. Up to now, the existing blocks didn't have any balconies, so there was no amenity space for the residents within the actual apartments. This is then just a quick cross-section, looking at the similar details that previously, the 3 locations. At the roof level, the existing chimneys and water tanks were removed and allowed the roof to be completely insulated. In areas here, some of the overhanging sections were removed where they kind of clash with walkways. Otherwise, the proposal was to insulate them. Again, the walkways and balconies, they were separated from the existing structure to allow for insulation behind to prevent cold bridging. And at the ground floor level, again, insulation was brought up on the outside, and we actually insulated on the ground floor here at floor level, again, to improve the thermal comfort. In addition, the walls were externally insulated. We inserted triple glazed windows and provided new balconies and walkways. And then there was PV panels were provided as well to generate some electricity for the residents as well, which they get benefit of. Here are just some typical details of how we actually dealt with some of the existing features. In discussions with the residents, the one thing that was always at the back of their minds and one major concern was to do with cold bridging and mold growth. So in order to make sure that whatever work we did wouldn't actually result in any kind of new mold appearing in the blocks, we did thermal analysis of the new junctions to make sure that on the internal side it would always be warm, so there wouldn't be any issues of mold growth. This was done then both in 2 dimensions and also in 3 dimensions. This here on the right kind of shows where the proposed balconies are shown, showing that there's no case of cold bridging occurring. The photograph work was beginning on site. As you can see, the elevation of the existing blocks, they were quite simple elevations. Some of the earlier sims had much more features in terms of, but in terms of the existing blocks, the brickwork was actually quite badly deteriorated. It was part of the problem for the mold growing inside as well. It allowed a lot of moisture ingression as well. The existing balconies as well, which would cause a lot of cold bridging. And you can see the chimneys and the water tanks on the roof. So the first thing that was done was the existing stairs were removed, and the space that was generated by the removal of the stairs was then incorporated into some of the apartments, so adding a little bit of extra space for the residents. Next, then, a new structure was brought to the outside, a new steel frame separated from the structure of the buildings for the new walkways. And then care was taken in all the detail to prevent any potential cold bridging for the new balconies where they were inserted. New triple glazed windows were inserted. They were made completely airtight as well to improve the thermal values. External insulation was applied. And then at ground floor level, security in terms of not being damaged, but also in terms of tying in with the new build, brick slips were applied as well. These were actual sections of the actual brick that was used in the new build to try and to kind of harmonise between the existing blocks and the new blocks that were inserted. In terms of the consultation we had with residents, the major thing that came over and over again was their concern with security. So the internal courtyards, basically, these were the existing green open spaces that were underutilised there. They were now enclosed now with, by the new build buildings as well. So this now provides a landscape courtyard where the children can come out and play safely away from the cars. Previously, basically, the play spaces were in amongst the car parking spaces. In terms of actual access as well, each staircase has its own kind of secure system. Previously, there were just open staircases, so this provides much greater security for the residents, which was a major concern for them. In terms of the public realm, then as well, it was extensively landscaped. What we did for the entrances, rather than just having a traditional situation of having railings and that, which can be quite kind of not necessarily get the right impression and kind of be quite aggressive. We introduced planting bays here, which do provide kind of security for the residents, but a much more pleasant environment and visually much more pleasant. In terms of security as well, then we also provided steel doors for the residents as well, because there's quite a lot of antisocial behaviour, unfortunately, in the areas, to give that sense of security as well. In terms of materials as well, they were very robust. Brick is a very common material in Dublin, and especially for social housing, so we utilise brick as well. The entrances are secure. As part of the development for the existing blocks, we kind of did a proposal that for the larger units, for the 3-bed units, where there would be quite a lot of children, that they would all be located at the ground floor, so they'd have direct access for the children out into the courtyard. In terms of other sustainability, in terms of renewables, we used GGBS concrete for the foundations. There was additional permeability. We used permeable baling as well to kind of to improve the actual rainwater runoff. And then we worked closely with a local artist as well, and she was very much involved with indigenous trees, Irish trees, and particularly fruit trees. So in terms of the landscaping, we introduced some of these, the idea being that in future years, when they develop, that the residents themselves be able to pick some fruit from those trees. And finally, in terms of biodiversity, there's quite a lot of bat activity along the canal. So in some of the roof areas, we introduced bat boxes and swift boxes for endangered species. This is just an image then of the two-story housing. The new terrace house overlooks the Grand Canal. Because they have windows now overlooking the canal, and the pathway in the canal provides much more passive supervision. And the new roadway as well provides much more activity as well. We're hoping in the future that the actual railings between the development and the canal will be taken down, so it'll be much more of an amenity for the residents along the canal. Here as well, we have the lower scale development, the single story, because this facade is south facing, actually allows sunshine to go into the rear. This is a plan of one of the existing blocks. What we did on the ground floor units, we knocked 2 of the units into one to make a much larger kind of family unit, open directly out into the courtyards. On the upper floors as well, 3-bedroom units, we removed 1 bedroom to make them larger. And again, 2-bedroom units, we removed 1 bedroom to make them larger for the residents. The location of the stairs was then moved out. This was the location for the stairs, and that was then allowed for extra space to be introduced into the existing apartments as well to make them that bit more generous. As a request of residents as well, in the larger units, we separated living and dining areas. This was a request that if, say, children were doing homework and that they would have a separate room, then say if the family were watching television, just to kind of give that extra separation as well. This is a photograph then of some bricks that were inscribed by the residents themselves. Basically, as part of the work, the existing residents temporarily had to move out. And the idea was that each of the families in the existing blocks would have their name inscribed on a brick. And they came to me and kind of said, where could these bricks be inserted? So I had to think, and I thought that one of the nice ideas might be to have them inserted in some of the external walls. So now basically, if families, whether they actually come back, or even if they weren't, if they haven't come back, their name would be forever kind of enshrined within the walls of the development. Throughout the whole process, I think it was very important that we kind of kept discussing issues with the local community and the residents. Finally, on the completion of phase 1, there was a debate then for the future phase of whether we'd carry on with retrofitting or go with new build. This is a discussion that is actually going on because there are a lot of housing estates across the city. And there's a debate, especially in terms of intensification, because of the scale of the existing blocks, many of them are 3 or 4 stories. There's kind of a pressure to demolish and build much higher density, much higher blocks. So as part of a study on the phase 1, we did a life cycle analysis, just comparing the carbon footprint if we had actually gone ahead and demolished the whole block and done it all new build. And what we actually found was that by actually retaining the existing blocks and not demolishing, we actually saved just under 600 tons of carbon. This debate, I think, is something that's very much to the forefront in terms of how we view the future. In terms of Dublin City Council, we have our housing stock is approximately 26,000 units. With large of those units, the majority of them, about 16,000, would be houses. But in terms of the blocks, most of our apartment blocks are from the 60s, 50s and 60s. So this discussion about whether to demolish or whether to retrofit is one that's very much to the forefront. And also how, if we are retaining them, how to actually intensify the use by adding extra kind of new build, maybe a bit like maybe in phase 1 here, to actually maybe providing courtyards to actually enhance the existing blocks as well and the quality for the residents. Only then this is just a view down along the canal. As I said, what we're hopeful is there are proposals that this canal walkway would be enhanced and form a cycle track, so there should be a lot more activity going on. And long term, we do hope that the railings will be removed and be much more access to the canal for the residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I am really curious to ask you one question. We have a couple of minutes left. During your presentation, you've mentioned a lot of architectural solutions and details related with the safety and against the vandalism. So how did it change after the reconstruction? Have you done any research whether it helped, whether the social behavior of the community changed?
Well, very much so. One thing that was very interesting is in terms of the block, which is now enclosed. I think the residents, it was the first time I've seen in spaces, like when you go and visit there, you always see children out playing in the courtyards there on the swings, they're playing with the equipment. And residents were sitting out. You can see it has actually generated a much greater sense of community within each block. There's a great spirit, like all the residents. They're taking great pride in the spaces, even the communal spaces are well looked after. They're washed regularly and whatever. So it does seem to be, whereas previously they were much more just individual blocks, so people were kind of much more to themselves. the architecture, by creating those courtyards, it has created more of a kind of a community atmosphere within those blocks. But the actual security things, definitely the residents feel a lot more secure in those blocks than on the other ones, where there were much more open staircases. It is sadly a feature of the estate that there were quite severe problems in terms of antisocial behaviour. We are hopeful that as the regeneration moves on, that those issues will be resolved. It is important, though, I think, also to emphasise that in terms of regeneration, physical regeneration is only just one part of it. It's very much to do with regeneration of the whole community as well, in terms of making sure that issues such as unemployment and health and well-being are also addressed at the same time. Because in terms of architecture, you can only go so far in terms of actually physically kind of improving the environment in someone lives. There are other aspects as well that improve the quality of life, which are equally important for the community as well.
I think that was really a nice wrap-up of your presentation to mark those important values. So thank you very much, Stefan.
Yes, much.
And I will move to our next speaker, Christopher Ketil Den Carlsen. Sorry if I pronounce your name in the wrong way. He's an architect, a co-founder, partner at Teknestuen Lokal from Denmark, and he will present the project Orsted Gardens. So Christopher, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Can people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, that's perfect.
And we see your presentation.
That's wonderful. Okay, thanks for inviting us to speak at this very interesting conference. Like Ruta said, my name is Christopher, and I'm the co-founder of Teknestuen Lokal. And we did this project called Orsted Gardens, which is a facade transformation of a 60s building in Fredericksburg in Copenhagen. Our firm are interested in a holistic approach to architecture, of course, and we've tried to develop our own way of thinking about sustainability in architecture, which means that besides thinking about social and environmental sustainability, we also think a lot about the building culture that we are surrounded with in our environment. And that's kind of the way that we look at all our projects. We think that sometimes new developments become too detached from their context and they seem foreign, which is something that we're trying to integrate into our projects. This is the project that we are talking about today. It's a residential building in Fredericksburg, which was built in '68, I think. And Fredericksburg is a really beautiful municipality inside Copenhagen that has a lot of classical architecture. And the residents of this building, they contacted us and said that they kind of felt ashamed by living in the most ugly building in Fredericksburg. And we went out and had a look at it, and obviously it's not really harmonious with its neighboring buildings, but also it's pretty difficult to imagine that it could ever be. It's built in '68 and designed by a Danish architect called Ole Hagen, and he was famous in Denmark for this almost late modernist industrialized building techniques. It's a residential building, and it actually is privately owned. A lot of people have, contacted us and said congratulations on not tearing down this building, which really never was a possibility because people actually live in it and they're not renting, they own it. But it is really something else in Fredericksburg. It's built on a modernist ideal, which is super rational, and it has this open ground floor where there used to be a gas station. And as as people in Copenhagen stopped buying cars and start using bicycles, the gas station really didn't have an income. It wasn't enough to support that location anymore. So they wanted to move out, and conveniently a grocery store, a big chain, wanted to buy the ground floor and convert it into a supermarket. And to do this, they had to redistribute some of the common areas of the people in of the residents in the building, which meant that because they had to move some from the ground floor to a roof terrace, it had to be a unanimous vote to agree to let them move into the building. And that gave the residents some leverage against this corporation that wanted to move into the ground floor. And it was discussed how they could sort of contribute to the building as a whole. The building was, I don't know if it was the ugliest in Fredericksburg, but it has the common late modern signs that it doesn't really work in a Scandinavian climate. It has this access way where people access their apartments, and it's concrete, and when the rain pours and it freezes, the concrete starts to break down. And that was one of the things that they wanted us to look at. Also, they had a lot of issues with the noise from the street, and they wanted a new design. Basically, they wanted a facelift, and they had already gotten an offer from a contractor who wanted to do a very simple glazing of the structure, which would take care of the sound issue and the rainwater issue and the damage of the concrete. But they wanted to make us think, you know, a step more as to what could be done with this building. We see these buildings all over Copenhagen, where you take care of the tectonic issues, but you don't really address the social issues of the house. Basically, there was no common space where the residents could meet. So we sat down, and then we made a list of things that we would hope to improve on the building. We talked about visual comfort, acoustic comfort, better air quality, social and spatial diversity, water handling, biodiversity, heat loss from the apartments, and of course, the value of the apartments themselves. And these are some things that we wanted to integrate into the project. And so we started our design looking at these things. And this is the building as it was when we came. It's tilted from an angle. It's almost facing east by a few degrees. Basically, we wanted to take down these concrete guardrails that were there already. And then instead have an aesthetic that communicated the function of the building. It had a corporate feel to it with the long, sleek, cold design, and we wanted to have some individual balconies so that you could see that each of these actually represented a family or a homeowner in the building. And as we talked about, we wanted to integrate some greenery in some form, which became these gardens that are both on the outside and the inside of the building. And then we wanted the rain that falls on the facade to be naturally delayed as it moves towards the sewer system. And of course, glazing for sound and weathering. And even though it looks like a pretty interesting geometry, we were keen on making something that was actually quite simple in its structure. So you have these columns that go all the way from the top to the bottom, except for the ground floor. So it is actually quite rational with 45 identical glass triangles, if you will. And then also to make some private space around each balcony, we added these wooden slats on the ends of these. And basically, we wanted to introduce some rhythm to the streets rather than this long, inhuman block, which is why we shifted these glass base for each different story. And then it also gave us the opportunity to put greenery and plants on top. And this is the result from our renovation. And in the ground floor, you see the grocery store that moved in. They are quite happy. They told us that it is the most expensive of that kind of store in Copenhagen, but I think that the location can support it in this place. And each of these glass bays, it's part of a common space, but it has a private usage, and these glass bays can then open completely or be completely closed off depending on the weather. And this is a photograph from the street where you see all these green roofs that are automatically irrigated, so you never have water shortage, which is also the technique that we use to have such a small depth of soil in there. We wanted to have the architecture communicate the difference between the public space and the private, and that's why we introduced this steel bracket that then carries the entire load of the new architectural transformation. So the ground floor is plain brickwork where there's a supermarket, and then the more interesting and more personal architecture is on the top floors. As we did this, one of the things we had to consider when working on a building with the residents in it was how to actually make the transformation without having people to move out of their apartments. So we built this temporary wall that and the facade was then constructed on top of that. And then when they were done with the facade, they could just take down the wall from the inside, and people wouldn't have been bothered by the building, except maybe from the noise. And these are some detailed shots of how we solved the meeting between the ground floor and the top floors, and how we see these wooden slats that kind of break or soften the steel character of this renovation. The balconies themselves, they are on the outside of the accessway. So this is still a completely public and shared space. And then people have private use over their small triangle here. And what this does is that there was a lot of doubt about whether this would actually work out, because people were questioned whether people would go out there if you knew that your neighbor would actually walk by once in a while. But this was kind of a central point of the renovation, because the residents, they have private balconies on the western facade, and we wanted to make this a choice where people could actually go out and meet each other. And we didn't think that it would be a problem that people would walk by, because if you really wanted to be alone, you could just go out on your other balcony. And what this has done to the environment for the people who live in the building is that whereas before people would just come home and they would, if it was raining, they would run to their apartment and hurry inside, because there wasn't really an environment for them to be. But the quality of the space has really transformed because it's become more like a community now, where people actually have the doors open. A friend of mine lives in the building, and his two children, they run from his apartment to the neighbor's apartment, and it has more the quality of a small street in a suburb than of a Copenhagen residential block. These are the naturally irrigated plant beds, automatically irrigated. And we discussed the plant strategy with the gardener, and a lot of people were concerned whether anything would grow in these raised plant beds. But he made a selection of a lot of different plants. And he said that he didn't have the right solution, but he would let natural selection decide what would actually be there. So on the outside, some of the plants that were put down in the beginning, they're not there anymore. So the plants that are most suitable for the specific environment are the ones that actually survive. And it's not a garden that you have to tend to. It's something that has its own life and sort of continues. You don't have to water it. You don't have to change the plants. It's supposed to look wild. And on the inside, the gardener did the planting strategy as well, but most of the residents have changed some of the plants. And since the kitchen is on the other side of this wall, they use it for kitchen herbs and stuff like that. What was interesting about this project is that we didn't have any public money. We didn't have any funding in any way. This was a partnership between the residents and the supermarket in the ground floor. And it was really interesting for us to see something that sort of grew of, local entrepreneurship, and that people, they wanted to take the chance on this project, even though that they had to put down some money themselves. But because they privately owned the apartments, they had a hope, a dream that the value of the apartments would actually rise with when the building became more aesthetically pleasing. Yeah, this is an image of the glass panes, how that during the winter, these are mostly closed off by all the residents because they don't want the noise from the street with the wet asphalt. And they don't want the heat loss from the apartments. And then during the summer, these glass panes, they usually go all the way to open because it's hotter outside. But it's really interesting how this space, being halfway between inside and outside, has extended the life of this of these access ways. That people actually use them during autumn and spring, and they actually get together on the outside, and people, they furnish their own balconies with their own furniture, and it's not something that we've decided or told people what to buy. It's just an extension of their home, which means that when you look at the building from the street, you can actually see different families living in different apartments, which is quite nice. Something else that I brushed on was the fact that there's a lot of doubt about whether the plants would actually grow in this environment, and we also had our doubts, but in reality the level of greenery on the facade now is really much more than we could have hoped for. This is after just half a year, I think, or it might be a year, but it's even more now. So it has this really dense green fabric to it. And yeah, of course, this is the main. This is the last image that I have. This shows the building after the renovation in its context. and you can see the aesthetic quality of the surrounding buildings. And this is something that has been, the debate surrounding this project, because a lot of people, they were interested in us transforming this project into something like this, because that's the quality of the neighborhood. And we were like, well, we can't do that, but we're really interested in architectural culture and tradition. But there are some limits to what you can do. So basically, we said that the building behind the glass that you see in this image, we didn't want to touch that. That remains as it was, both to adhere to the budget, but also because as we add this second skin or this new facade, the degradation of the interior facade stops. So when they renovate the facade the next time, that's how it's going to be for quite a while. Because the alternative to this was to keep repairing the concrete. And we're like, could we perhaps invest some money now and then protect the facade on the inside? And basically the aesthetic of the end project is something that, in our opinion, balances between the individuality of the private homes and then the industrial quality of the original project. And that's something that we didn't want to erase completely, and that's why it ended up like this. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have to say at this point.
So your project proves that it's not only a transformation of facade, but something more, transformation of lives of people as well. Just one small question. I presume that there are some 50 probably apartments over there, and maybe 50 different people owning those apartments. As far as I understood, they have a veto right when making decisions. Mm-hmm. How did you convince all of them to invest their own money into this project? I presume that it took a lot of time of explanation and negotiations.
I think that from the initial starting point, we didn't think that this project was actually going to be constructed, to be honest, because when they approached us, it was just a dream, an idea. And they said, can you make something that's more interesting? Paints that I showed first. So we did that, and we incorporated a lot of the ideas that we have about architecture. And I think that if we couldn't communicate to people the architectural qualities and the spatial qualities and the social investment has already proven to be greater than what they put in, because people, they didn't want to live in the building before, even though this is a really expensive address. Because of the aesthetics of the building, people were scared away. They didn't want to live in that building. And now it is a building that people actually do want to live in, that has an interesting architectural concept, and where you actually, unlike most Copenhagen multi-story housing, you meet your neighbors on a daily basis, and there's a really, there's a social quality to the new space. So to answer your question, it wasn't that easy, but we really thought that we had a good solution for them. But also we worked with the, I don't know what you would call it, the board of the residential, of the people living there, and they did a lot of work as well. And actually they held back their votes, the 4 people in the board. So when all the residents had said yes, and it was just negotiations between us and the contractor and the supermarket, the 4 people on the board actually had a veto against the entire project, which also resulted in our opinion, the architectural quality that is there today. Because of course, when they say yes and everything is signed, that's when the contractor starts to, manipulate the architecture and try to make it easier to build and all that. But they withheld their own vote so that they could leverage all the good architectural solutions.
So I am really happy for the success of this project, and I wish that we can see some copies of it somewhere, not only in Copenhagen. Thank you very much, Christopher. And I will go back to the list of our next speakers. And I would like to present an architect from Finland, Mona Shalin, from the office Kati Saunen, Mona Shalin Architects. And she will talk about a very impressive and beautiful project, which is Serpentine House Refurbishment. So Mona, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have some small technical problems, but I will try to share my screen and then. So this is the screen and the presentation. Just a moment. I have to find that slideshows site. So can you see the screen?
Yes.
The slideshow?
Yes.
Okay,
perfect.
fine. Then I'm happy. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And this has been a very rewarding day. Of course, like I also was, we have been shocked about the war in Ukraine, and it was very good that you could invite Olena to present things that we are all as architects also thinking about, the rebuilding after the great destruction, the rebuilding of buildings and the rebuilding of sites, even if rebuilding people is something very different. But this leads anyway to my topic, which is the refurbishment of the Serpentine house in Helsinki, because also here we are dealing with a direct post-war topic of the rebuilding and new housing for families who had come from very poor conditions, or also from all the people who had to leave Karelia at the end of the Second World War, when Finland, as some of you may know, with the peace discussions and the decisions, Finland had to part with some of its eastern areas, and this we had to house about 500,000 people after the war. And this is the background also for the building of the Serpentine house, even if it was not directly aimed at frontmen and families who had lost their father or the family in the war. But anyway, it was in the general situation. I will talk a little about the background before I go into the project of the Serpentine house, and please keep me online with the schedule. But before that, even something about the assessment of modern architecture and awareness of the values. In Finland, I think because of our very young history and our mostly wooden buildings before the 19th century, we have very little left of that old architecture, and we consider ourselves as a country with mostly modern architecture, and the majority of the buildings, a huge majority, is built after the Second World War. So and then we have, of course, one very prominent architect, Alvar Aalto, one of the leading figures in the 20th century architecture, internationally even, which means also that there has been a special interest. We have an Alvar Aalto Academy, which is focused on the restoration, conservation, and rehabilitation works of Alvar Aalto, and it has also reflected reflections in a general field that the interest for conservation has also produced these MARC courses that we arranged, several international postgraduate courses for architects discussing the conservation issues of modern architecture, and also the post-war housing areas have been an interesting topic for us in these courses, the rehabilitation and transformation. And then, of course, we also have a very active Docomomo group in Finland, which means that the listing and assessment of our architecture from those the modern period has been quite actively published, and also the Serpentine house is one of the Docomomo projects. Oh yes, and then even because our legal system for town planning is very strictly regulated, and building can only be implemented through approved democratically, so we say approved town plan, then the idea of inventories and surveys of what our architectural heritage, also the modern movement heritage and post-war buildings, has been largely carried out in Helsinki. And then it is quite common today that the requirement for a building permit of a building that is considered to have any kind of architectural values must be preceded by a historic building survey report, which is very often done, also produced by architects. And this was also the case in the Serpentine house refurbishment project, that very early on, the city of Helsinki planning department commissioned a historic building survey of this site, which I'm going to tell you about. But municipal social housing has a history from about the end of the First World War, when Finland became independent, and there was quite a large need for housing, and the city of Helsinki initiated social housing projects, which were usually like smaller wooden houses, maybe for 2 or 4 families. And there was also already a development and what should we say, knowledge about these things, and an interest among the architects to do qualified work with housing, which was of course something quite new. And of course there are European models also from that time. But then the Second World War, which in Finland, in fact, it consists of 3 different wars: the Winter War, and then the Continuation War, when Finland was on the side of Germany, and then the Lapland War, when Finland fought against the Germans who were leaving and destroyed the northern parts of Finland, burnt all the houses and so on. And then we talked about this Karelian the frontmen and the families who had to leave Karelia and be rehousing. Most of the housing in the beginning consisted of frontman single dwellings that the families could build themselves, wooden houses that the architects designed models for these houses. So we have a very kind of typological building. And then there were temporary housing barracks built in Helsinki for families also, which were considered to last about 10 years or so, but of course they were kept much longer. But the last ones have already now disappeared. But then the idea that you can't solve the housing problem, but only by building one family small dwellings, that blocks of flats will be the solution in an urban area like Helsinki, was of course emerging. And at the end of the 1940s, especially when the Helsinki housing production committee and housing production delegation were established, they began a period of quite intensive building of housing, and on a quite high standards, because the leader or the of this housing committee was an architect, Hilding Ekelund, who had worked both with the architect's paper, the architect's magazine, and he was also teaching housing design, and he was a very skilled architect himself. So he also chose a group of architects for this housing schemes, these new housing projects. He divided the tasks between a group of 6-7 architects who designed for different areas, new housing. Usually they were about blocks with about 200 flats. And they were not quite similar, but they worked together and they had discussions. So this is kind of interesting when the collegial discussions they were not competing with each other. They were trying to develop the housing quality. And the city of Helsinki also had a garden designer, Elisabeth Koch, who participated, and they also commissioned an artist, Eino Kauria, to do the color scheme design for this building. So color was, of course, almost cost very little, and you could enhance the quality and the architecture with colors, which was, of course, an idea also from the modern movement times, when the idea of how colors impress, how they can impress people or create sentiments. But the typologies and models for the housing blocks had developed quite quickly since the early 20th century. And there was a new professorship for town planning also established after the war. And the ideas how you could open up the blocks. Of course, this is a modern movement idea, but you can see that in the different examples, they were quite variedly applying these principles. But the Zeilenbau idea, which is the number D, or D in the middle of the picture, was of course the modern movement, top one typology that one would want to break up with more forms and more varied courtyard ideas. The models for rental housing were still the ones that the modern movement pioneers had introduced, like Mies van der Rohe in the Weissenhof-Siedlung apartment block, column and slab construction, and a very slim building block type, which was adapted also in the Helsinki projects. Daylight and a possibility to have ventilation through the apartments was considered very important for hygienic reasons still. And but there also were new point block types that were applied. So there's quite a variety. But the buildings, they look very similar if you see, when you see them from the outside. They are usually plastered buildings, rendered building with a pitched roof, and because of the building techniques, you could only have quite small quadratic windows, and not this. There was not this modern movement from the late 1920s with the ribbon windows, and so it was not structurally possible, even if the architects had studied and were not laterally very impressed by these examples, but it was a more traditional technique that was applied because of lack of concrete and steel. So in fact, it was quite a handicraft based building still. Some of the examples of the state loan apartments built along a route out of Helsinki. To the left, high-rise pitched roof buildings, which were also much criticized at the time from the architect's point of view. But then the usual early 1950s post-war buildings would be something like you see on the right side, a very pleasant housing block project with garden designed by Elisabeth Koch, which is still very well preserved and repaired. And in general, this period, these buildings from the early 1950s have been much appreciated, and they are both private owned and municipal buildings. Like this municipal rental blocks that are situated quite near the Serpentine house, another project that our office has been working on. This is a perspective drawings from the early 1950s by Hilding Ekelund, or maybe by the artist who did all the color schemes, Eino Kauria. This site, the Pohjolankatu site, has a very beautiful garden designed by Elisabeth Koch, and in the refurbishment project, this is like very much a part of the values of this. Not the buildings are quite modest in their appearance, and the flats are quite well planned, because Hilding Ekelund was very skilled at designing in very small areas functional housing. But the importance is also attached to this gardens and the grown trees and these very little parking areas, and instead playgrounds and social for common grounds here between the buildings. And this is of course one thing that we appreciate in these times when town planning was not based on densification, but left these green areas between the buildings. In Helsinki, many areas also had forest trees left, and they were preserved. Firs and pines are still growing among the planted trees. This Pohjolakatu apartments have been refurbished on the very same principles as the Serpentine buildings. We learned a lot during the Serpentine building process, and also, let's say, the city of Helsinki commission, our client, the patron of these rental flats, also accepted to have a kind of conservation approach in the refurbishment, improving technical conditions, but not really changing the appearance of the flats, and by repairing everything that could be repaired, wooden cabinets, kitchen cabinets, and windows, doors, everything that could be preserved was preserved and repaired by carpenters, and which is also, of course, our ecological consideration, that and natural ventilation was preserved. There are not any ventilation, not mechanical ventilation, except from the saunas and the laundries. Typical features of the apartment buildings in the post-war decade would be, like I said, the green spaces between the buildings, where you dry your laundry outside in the courtyard, and then the playground is there behind. This is even before the refurbishment. And then I try to list something to point out what would be the typical features from this period. Slabs and point blocks, an open structure on the town plan, and modern movement models still remaining. The living environment, focus on space for play and social life, and laundry drying, greenery, saving forest trees, modern garden designs. This was rental housing, council housing, and the quality was high. Construction technique, because war reparations, when Finland had to pay to the Soviet Union huge war reparations, though the industry had the priority for steel and cement, and building had to be mostly carried out with more traditional materials. So the walls would be of masonry walls, sometimes even anyway, modern materials would be applied on the facade under the plastering, gas concrete blocks, betocell, etc. Floor slabs used concrete, they were cast on site, but concrete was scarce. And all kinds of materials you can find when you start renovating these flats that the partition walls can be of just any materials. You never really know what you will find. Pitched roofed, cold ventilated attics. Facades usually rough cast render, painted with lime wash, very traditional materials. But then the cantilevered balconies, which each flat usually got its own balcony. That was something new after the war. And it was also connected, of course, with hygiene, that you put your bedclothes out to get aired. Then the wooden doors and windows were industrially fabricated by many small wooden industry workshops, but the details would be standardized, because after the war, the Architects League and other organizations started huge work on standardizing details, and you could have all the drawings from the detail from this published let's say, like manuals for how to build. So they were just very much like each other. They were painted with linseed oil paint. Then you used bricks. Red brick roofs was very usual, because steel sheets were only scarcely available for roofing. In the stairwells, color with linseed oil paint was used to create an atmosphere, and the terrazzo flooring was what we have everywhere. Family flats with mainly 2 rooms and a kitchen or kitchenette was the usual solution, and a small bathroom with a bathtub for every flat. Then there were common facilities like laundry rooms, saunas, storerooms were built separately from the apartments. And then natural ventilation, of course, cold and hot water pipes, radiators, central heating. Just to point out, there are differences in different countries, and the solutions can be different, but this is the background for the Serpentine house, which has many of those facilities, only that the architect Yrjö Lindegren, who was commissioned for this, he was true modernist, and he wanted to have a flat roof, not the pitched roof that you see everywhere else. So he developed his design with the flat roof idea and balconies on the rooftop, and with some skylights rising from the building. But the main idea that Yrjö Lindegren, let's go there, had was to instead of using the town plan scheme that was already existing with lamellar blocks, he said he could put the same amount of flats, just like making this undulating, snake-like, serpentine-like building. And so he presented this solution, and it was accepted. And a building that consists of about 190 flats, and then a service building with a swimming pool, sauna, laundry, and a kindergarten, and the central heating, in that building. The site was between a family dwelling area, very green area. Here is the site for the Serpentine house. It's a wooded, hilly, narrow site, and on the other side is a very busy road nowadays, the main road out towards the airport when you leave Helsinki to the north. So there's a lot of traffic nowadays, and this is where the block of flats was situated, and as a wall sheltering the courtyards on the western side, where the afternoon sun would shine, and sheltering these courtyards from sound. And here on the right is a present day aerial view after the refurbishment. So the two units of blocks of flats were used to create this undulating line. And here we have a typical floor plan. There are 3 apartments on each for each stairwell on each floor, and one of the apartments has balconies and windows just to one side, and the others are open in 2 directions. So this is in fact a very narrow, slim building in that sense, which allowed the daylight to enter. And on the right side is a list of the different flats. That's 45 square meters was the most usual for the 2-room flats, or then 49 to 50 square meters for the 2 rooms with kitchens. And they were designed for families. Families with many children, in fact, was considered sufficient at the time. The building was appreciated when it was finished very much. It was published in the Architects magazine, and it even became a kind of icon of modern architecture after the war. Of course, this undulating line and the structure system that you can see in the facades was all very, very individual, and there is no other building in Finland of the same with the same solution. But time passed, and the city of Helsinki didn't really spend so much money on the repairs and upkeep, so the building was in quite bad state of deterioration in 2010, when the first projects were being made for this renovation. It had been renovated in the 1980s, and that was the basis for this new work, because the kitchen cabinets had not been torn out, they had been repaired. The windows were original. The balconies had not been repaired for a very long time, and you can see here in what state they were. As a matter of fact, small stones falling out of the concrete, which was from this post-war area. When you didn't have so much cement, you put small stones instead into the concrete, so it wasn't really of a very high quality, which led to the fact that we had to tear out the balconies and rebuild them according to measure, but they were reconstructed. The plan by Yrjö Lindegren, you can see here, closer, the small bathroom with the bathtub. After the 1970s, bathtubs weren't produced anymore in Finland, and in the 1980s renovation, it was replaced by a shower, which was the usual in. And then the kitchens had well, there was no refrigerator, of course, in the time when this Serpentine house was built, but the kitchens anyway had place for a little table for dinner for a small family. And this had been renovated in the 1980s, and some small changes had been made, but still the building had retained its characteristics. And when the renovation project, the refurbishment project started, the city of Helsinki commissioned this inventory and historic building survey. So there was an architect's office, Keijo Koskinen's office, who investigated, surveyed all the apartments, photographed, documented them. Here are some pictures from that time. And then also in the plans, they indicated whatever changes had been made from the beginning in the interiors, what cupboards, what appliances had been retained, and what had been torn out and replaced. So this was the background. When we started, we didn't have to start from zero. We had a lot of information, and the team that was collected for this renovation project, the engineers and the conservators, etc., were gradually working themselves towards a common understanding, which I think is one of the most interesting experiences as an architect, was that in this Serpentine house, there were very, very varied opinions in the beginning how to proceed with the renovation. But in the end, I think we could work very well as a team, and also with the building contractor, with the young engineers working in the building company with the implementation. The cooperation was very dense and very intensive, very much discussions, models for all the solutions, which made it possible to work with this as a kind of really more in a conservation conservation type of refurbishment. But before that, of course, tearing down the plaster from the facades, opening up the ventilation ducts, tearing down the bathroom slabs, and seeing what the concrete was really like in the early 1950s. It wasn't very much cement, it was everything but cement. And then looking at what the walls had, how they had been built. We made also changes in the plans during the process. This was also done in 2 stages, so that there was a pilot project with the first building, which is a shorter one, and then some changes were made to be adapted in the bigger building. But of course, this is quite ordinary for all architects. When you do a renovation, at first it looks like a ruin, and then you start and then you rebuild, because all these technical installations that we have today, they need to be accommodated. Electricity, electrical cables, but we still could retain the natural ventilation, and into the flats introduced new vents in the exterior walls, because they had been left out initially, never built. And we also retained the radiators, renovated them, and the windows, the wooden windows were lifted out of the masonry wall. They were sent to Estonia, and an Estonian company renovated the windows and repainted them with linseed oil, etc. So this was also, and there were Ukrainian ladies working in that workshop, I remember, because I visited the workshop some years ago when they were working on it. So thinking about those people today. The balconies were reconstructed, but with extremely detailed measured drawings and of all the dimensions, and we retained the color scheme. New rough render had to be applied, trying to do all the detailings as much according to the original ones. And working with the models, which means also the door handles and trying to find out reconstructing the colors that the artist had originally designed for the staircases with the help of a conservator. Reconstructed a skylight, these wonderful staircases in the A unit that have these skylights, both windows protruding from the rooftop, above the rooftop, and even a surplus skylight, so that people entering they're coming home from work or from school, the children, they would have this kind of experience of daylight and color, which I think is one of the most charming features of this building also. The tenants tenants from about the city of Helsinki were also, of course, consulted in this project, and we met all the tenants, in fact, because we made a few rounds around the whole building and to measure the windows and investigate their condition and so on. It was very interesting. It was even one old lady who had been living in the building since the early 1950s, and I think she was 90 years old, and she was living on the top floor without an elevator, which is quite amazing. But most of the tenants wanted to return. They could also choose to have another flat in another part of the city of Helsinki, rental flats, but I think most of them wanted to return to the Serpentine house. One small detail, that we have such a town plan, the protection town plan for the Serpentine house. Even these clothes racks from the 1950s were retained and repaired, because they were protected in the town plan. This is how, and so on, so that this was considered to be very important, this handicraft traces. So we tried to design also some new cupboards and repair all the old kitchen cupboards, which were at their time a new industrial product based very much on the German Frankfurter Küche idea by Schütte-Lihotzky, with even the German glass boxes that you for spices and sugar and salt, etc. So here are some, and this is how the Serpentine houses appears today from the air. This has retained the eggshell white color, and the trees have been preserved and the courtyards have been a bit improved, but with much respect to the original appearance of the forest trees remaining, and some new colorful flowers, which were also very usual in the 1950s, that you had perennial flowers in the courtyards of these houses and play areas and so on. We also built new saunas in the basement, but I'm not going into that. But this is what when we can say that we have achieved this kind of rehabilitation of this quite deteriorated Serpentine house, and also that both the tenants and the general scene, let's say, of architects and public have appreciated this. Has got lots of publicity. I never noticed that any kind of this housing renovation project would be so much published and broadcasted and interviewed. We also got it was awarded the Finlandia Prize for Architecture in 2019, which also shows how much the appraisal of renovation of housing has come into focus. So, and it was considered as a interesting and an important model for sustainable renovation, because the natural ventilation has been preserved, which is becoming quite unusual nowadays when you have more and more requirements. But protected buildings, listed buildings, can avoid needing to adjust to all the European directives and which also means that we didn't have to do a lot of insulation, added insulation. We only improved the windows performance for heating, for preserving the temperature, but we didn't need to change the external walls. All these things that would have in the end led to a building which would have looked very much different than the old Serpentine building. And of course, this cannot be an example or a model for the huge mass of buildings, but anyway, it has had a lot of influence in raising the awareness of that you could work alongside the building. And I could say that because this was a kind of a interaction project, that's also why it was this Serpentine House was awarded this Docomomo award, very much due to this kind of process, which is of course what really can't be seen in the result. You only know how many people and how many discussions, how many meetings were involved with authorities, the users, the contractors, the client, and the designers, the engineers. But this is about what I was going to present to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mona, for presenting such a sensitive and meticulous renovation of, I would say, this is architectural heritage. Of course, it is a unique example, but as you said, it could help to educate and raise awareness of what can renovation bring, and of course, to present as well the values of modernism architecture. And I will share my just personal memory that at the university, my generation and also the generation of maybe some 15 years older people, they were taught by architects who, during the Soviet times, they used to go to Finland to see modernism architecture, because it was the only country in the West that they could go, because of course of the Iron Curtain, and the rest of the world was closed. So a lot of modernism architecture here in Lithuania is inspired by Finnish architecture. So thank you for that. That's why we have our valuable legacy of 20th century second half architecture. And I'm very glad that that you showed this example, which is really inspiring. So I will move to the next presentation, coming from Slovakia. Architect Lukas Kordik from the office Good will present a project Panelak. So Lukas, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am going to try to share it. My present, so desktop, and then I do.
Yes, we can see your desktop right now.
Yeah, it's massive. It's like full screen mode. Is it okay? Can you see
Yes,
it?
that's perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for being part of this nice event. Yeah, let's see many interesting projects, and yeah, it's something that enriched me really a lot after, I think, being closed during the last 2 years and having really the minimum of connection with abroad. I'm gonna talk about the project that we finished quite a long time ago. So it was like 2014, but it started in 2008. It's project called Panelak. Maybe to explain the word Panelak, it's really like a word that we use normally in Slovak. It comes from the word panel, that means like a prefab unit. So usually these kind of prefab housing we call Panelak. So it's just maybe a little entry for Slovak language. My partner and me, we both grew up in such buildings. And I think I have to say that most of Slovak people grew up in such a housing, and maybe that's a reality of most of people from Eastern Europe, I would say. So we all have kind of experienced living in such a housing, and we know all the positives and the negatives of these buildings. I would show maybe the picture of Petržalka. That's the place where I grew up. When I was a child, it looked a little bit different. It was more gray, so no really color mess, as you can see. But what is the most important, it was already said during these presentations here, it's that in this picture, we cannot see really the invisible interventions that are made individually in many flats. I mean, like changing the plans, new openings, you know, people, they really like were focusing on their own quality, and they really stepped into the structures, and no one knows how it is in fact. And then we have these kind of visible interventions, and that's this kind of color chaos that happened in these areas where each house community, when they try to reconstruct or renew their house, they really work with their own ideas, and all of these interventions has really nothing to do, mostly have nothing to do with the quality and kind of conceptual approach. So I have to say, we were always talking like how it would be nice to have an opportunity to work with such a structural substance house like this, you know, to have an opportunity to reconstruct or to really work on it in a really complex way. And that's something that happened where like two private investors, that is also very unique, came to our office, and they asked that they are really in the process of buying a prefab house in the city of Rimavská Sobota, that is on the southeast of Slovakia, small city, and they would like to work with us on it, and that we would find like a complex approach of its reconstruction. What is really important to say It's that at the very beginning when they came, they thought like, okay, we're gonna buy it, then we do the quick reconstruction and we sell the flats. But then in the process, somehow they realized maybe what would be more interesting is they just to keep the house and just rent it, and maybe to create a kind of a new quality compared to the other housing that is from the same period, and to enlarge the portfolio of possible units for renting. So and that's something maybe that finishes with or that has an impact on the quality that the investors and us, of course, we focused. And yeah, so this is the city of Rimavská Sobota. It's a small city where there are no big kind of these housing blocks areas. So you have really kind of individual housing kind of spread all over the city. Here is the city center, you can see. So we're quite close with the views as they are, but however, it's a nice part of Slovakia, I have to say. So what is the most important? We had a special opportunity again. That was that we came to a house that were really in its original image as it was built, maybe with a small damages, but it has all its quality and all its layout plans and all its facades, and you could read everything as it was planned 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because it was built in the late 70s. So we had something that was almost preserved, and we could really study the construction and really to test it, and so look at it in this kind of complex way that what we wanted. So we what really we wanted to do was like testing the limits of the building and to reprogram it. So here you can see the original elevations where you can see still the grid of the panels or of the units, prefabricated units that the house was composed of, and very rigid facades, and like a party walls with no openings, because it was just a kind of a one type of the apartment buildings that was originally meant like to be part of a larger row of houses. And with a plan that was basically had one simple flat that was just copied all around in the house. So even the spaces around were really in quite a poor conditions. So you can see like how it looked when we came for the first time, and yeah, basically simple house. So first aim was just to look at the plans and to adjust the new internal layout. What was the most important here is just to understand the construction of the building. And so what we really tried to do was like to clean the building all the way down and to its panel construction. And what was good for us, it was just that the construction system of the building works as a box, and it was in both directions. So that allowed us to do a kind of big openings in each direction. So we could really play with the new layout of flats and find really different solutions. So this was the original ground floor that was originally filled with storage facilities. What was most important for us, it was just to create this kind of a buffer for the community and to open the building as much as possible to its surroundings. So we said like, okay, we don't need that much of storage. We can just we can concentrate it and to open this level of ground floor and to give it as much as possible to new inhabitants. So we created a new layout where you have a cafe and the entrance and kind of fitness and area with the little sauna, and all these with the maximum openings and connection to the back garden. There's a new common entry or entrance that's served for all the inhabitants. So we just scratched 2 of them and created one entrance, and then you have a corridor that leads to 2 access staircases. Then the plans with flats. Original floor plan was quite monotonous, so it was composed out of one flat that was copied all around the access core, and the access core connected also common loggias that were on each floor. What we really focused on, because we could open the structure in a really large way, so we tried to focus on finding different flats layouts. So we created like 12 2 rooms flat and 12 3 rooms flat and 12 4 rooms flat, I think, and there are 2 special larger flats on the roof extension. One of the feature was like that we tried to locate or position the living area, of course, on the west side, but we created few layouts that had the living area connected with the kitchen and dining, and that went through the plan from one side to another. That allowed us to make big openings on both sides and to give more light into interior, and also in the next step to have the possibility to position the big balconies either on one side or 2 sides. So that was for us very important. And the other thing was like that we could find the openings also on the side of the party walls. The other thing was just the transforming of the building envelope. So because we work with the new plans, and with the new plans we were thinking about finding a new portfolio of the windows, because we wanted the windows really fits with the plan. So we created kind of we were like thinking, okay, what can we do with this kind of very rigid grid facade? So one of the most important thing for us was just, okay, let's work with kind of a portfolio of the new openings. So we had a lower kitchen window that served in the kitchen that didn't have the access to the balcony, but then we have the big opening windows that leads to the balconies, etc. So we worked with that. So we enclosed the shed loggias and could play with this kind of new variety of openings. So we did this, and then we focused on openings on the party wall. So that was something for us that we understood that this house is originally meant as a house that was prefabricated or should be a part of a larger prefabricated row of housing. But this one was standing all alone. So it was like freestanding house, and it didn't have any reason to keep it, with the party wall with no openings. So we said like, okay, let's break this kind of original way, how it was meant when it was built. So we created these openings, and then the next step was just isolate whole buildings with a thick layer of isolation. Here, what was another important point for us, it was just that we wanted to have whole volume as one united building. So we even connected the upper roof extension with a lower level volume in one building. So we didn't want to make the roof extension visible and readable from the outside. And maybe to say just another thing is like that, and this was the step where the grid of the panels just disappeared. So yeah. And the last two steps were like upper roof extension and the additional boxes and the layer of 30 new balconies. So as we knew the construction and the possibilities that we could work with, so the upper extension was made as light steel construction that was covered and enclosed with like sandwich construction, light wooden sandwich construction. Important for us was just to create kind of a vocabulary how to work with this construction, and that because we wanted to have it visible, all these steel frames and beams, and you know, like to have it a part of interior of the flats. So we work really in the details, like how to connect them, how to where we want to have them visible. If there's a, for example, kitchen, if there is a bathroom, so how these details incorporate into the final interior. That was, we have to say at the beginning, quite shock for the investors, because those two flats were for them in the end. But for us, it was kind of a nice contrast with this kind of really flat and easy looking interiors of the original house. So in the end, it finished like with all these steel construction visible. And that's we're really happy that we really that the investors really understood our aim. We created this model showing the way we wanted to see this house, because okay, when we came to the house it was empty, but we understand that all the time, you know, there, even as I spoken about the small interventions. So all the people, they have their own interventions somehow in these buildings. So we said like, okay, let's do these small interventions for them and give them, you know, the place at these balconies, and also to give each of the flat a piece of exterior that would be private for them, but with this kind of visible connection in between. So that's something that was not present in this house before. So so we came with this kind of light steel hanged balcony that had really nice proportions, like 2.2, I think, by 2.2 meters. So you can really place a table for 4 people and to have lunch or dinner. We tested it before. We knew that okay, it's working. I think the first a little bit, he turned a little bit, so we have to enforce it, but somehow it worked. And what happened, that these balconies they became a new layer for the building, something that became really kind of a significant or specific image for the new building. So this kind of light steel construction, where the floor is made out of wood, became kind of a, you know, like a new T-shirt for the building. That is really light, that maybe could not be there, but without these balconies, we think that the house would be not that house. So it gives us, you know, this kind of a hairy feeling, we would say, and put the life of the people living inside outside. So here we can see the balcony is also on the party wall. So it gives the house complete different feeling, you know, like that it has this kind of extensions of the interior, and it becomes really something not really like a framed. So this is the comparison of the former and the new elevation. So you see that from that kind of very readable panel construction that was super logic and came out of the logic of the former plans. So we came to something new that and that is that you can read the logic of the building and of the new plans that are that we proposed. Seeing from the interior, so this is what happened to the living areas. So you have your living areas that's enlarged. That is enlarged to the outside. So you have these kind of different views. And when you are outside, you can see the, you know, like the surroundings. What is maybe interesting here, that at the very first, one of the first slides I showed the picture of the area, and all the buildings were in the original colors. And after when we finished, I think most of the buildings, they are already renovated and you can see that the colors are already there. So you have this kind of yellow, light yellow, and colors that and these kind of mixtures of one facade. And that's why we decided to have this house in one color, simply white, and like not focusing really on the, like trying to find a perfect color combination. Next layer are the outside boxes on the ground floor. So the first box is the box for the entrance, and the other box is the box with the backyard terrace. The entrance is kind of one box that is half open, half closed, with this kind of simple glass enclosure that is, that it's just the space where you have the entrance. And then the box that is kind of a buffer in between the backyard and the ground floor facilities, where all the ground floor facilities have big windows that are connected with this area. Yes, this was right after when the house was finished, so you see a little life. And when we compare these two buildings, so the first is from 2008, and this is the building when it was finished in 2014. So you see the difference where not only on our building, but also on the buildings behind. So our aim was just to look at the reconstruction in a really complex way. So we work with the plans, we work with the construction. We try to focus on creating individual exterior extensions, but also on exterior extensions for the community of next new inhabitants. So and maybe a little bit personal thought in the end, it's like that we thought, like when we finished this house, we thought like that, okay, this could be a nice example that could be spread all over Slovakia and maybe Czech Republic. And we had a nice reactions, and people, they called us, okay, we would like to do something like this, and we have our community, we have our house, and let's have a look at this. And yeah, we always tried something to start to work on certain projects, but in the end it finished and it just bankrupt on kind of negotiations in between that communities, because everybody had a certain point of view on how it could finish. And that's maybe, yeah, on one side, okay, we say like we had this kind of beautiful opportunity that there were like two people that own one flat. I think they will never happen again. But it would be really nice that if this could happen also in a way of like, because all the flats are now privately owned, or most of the flats are now privately owned in our country. So you have these kind of communities that owns whole buildings, and they have to negotiate and find a way how they want to do, and that's where it's like where it ends. So I was really shocked when I've heard Christopher talking about the project Austin Gardens, where he that's something completely on the other side, like totally different conditions. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Lucas. I was going to ask you the question, but you answered that question by yourself. It was about the possibility to repeat that project, because I can see that we are in a similar situation when it comes to the common agreement of the inhabitants of the communities. Then mostly the project stops, because it is very, very hard to find a unanimous decision by the community, and probably we have to find out the way how the architects can implement good ideas. without jeopardizing them at the primary stage. So I'm not sure, but somehow there's a lot of ground for work and maybe some education for the architects for the future, that convincing of your future client is the most important thing. So thank you very much, Lucas.
Thank you.
And now we are moving to our next presentation. This presentation should have been presented in the morning session because it's about research, and it's about research from Estonia, but as the presenter lives in New York, we had to adjust a little bit our time schedule. And I hope that Lydia is here, and I would like to present Lydia Kalipoliti. She's an architect, engineer, and scholar, assistant professor of architecture in the Cooper Union, New York. And she's a head co-curator of Tallinn Architecture Biennale 2022. So I'm really curious to know what they are preparing for the autumn, because it's the autumn season when the Tallinn Biennale will happen. And I would like to invite Lydia to make her presentation, Circular Block, Reinventing the Microrayon. So Lydia, if you are here, the floor and the screen is yours.
Thank you, Ruta. Thank you so much for this introduction. And yes, I'm not presenting a particular project, but a competition on the microrayon. So let me just share my screen. Just give me 1 second. I'm trying, I have the presenter notes, so I have to just adjust for, give me 1 second. I will adjust. I think we're good now, hopefully.
Perfect. Yes.
So thank you so much for your invitation to participate in this conference. As Ruta mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at the Cooper Union in New York, and I mostly write books on environmental topics. But today I will present to you an international competition that we have organized as part of the upcoming Tallinn Architectural Biennale that I'm co-curating with Areti Markopoulou, and it opens in September 2022. So we hope to see many of you or some of you at the opening on September 7. The competition title is Circular Block, Reinventing the Microrayon. And it was part of the general theme of the Tallinn Architecture Biennial, which is entitled Edible, or the Architecture of Metabolism. And it's co-curated by myself and Areti Markopoulou in collaboration with local advisor Ivan Sergeyev. Just to give you a few words on what the Biennale is about and how this idea of the microrayon has entered the main topic of the Biennale. It starts from the very big problem of global food production and the industry of big agriculture, and the architecture that supports it, that offers a spectacular insight into climate change and its entanglement with questions of ecology and justice. Industrial agriculture remains today an exceedingly unsustainable practice, from production and transport to consumption and waste. The abundance produced by it, the promise of endless food security, comes at a very steep cost to the global climate, ecological cycles, biodiversity, and rural communities. Industrial agriculture uses 75% of farmland, 70% of freshwater use to feed 30% of the world's population. So overall, global food production degrades the natural resources on which it depends and pollutes the air, water, and soil substantially. There are many projections, and I'm just going to share one today. In 2050, there will be 9.7 billion people on Earth. And in order to feed them, the global food system will need to produce 70% more calories than it currently does, and much to do so in a way that is equitable, nutritious, ecologically sustainable, and carbon negative. Yet agriculture is already responsible for 1/3 of total greenhouse gas emissions. So how would this plan ever work in the first place? By 2050, around 5 million lives a year, twice as many as the current obesity toll, could be lost as a result of current food production processes. Among the harmful impacts of such methods are diseases caused by air pollution, water contamination, health consequences of pesticide use, and increased antimicrobial resistance. Some of these principal causes are overuse of fertilizers, excessive reliance on antibiotics in animal, and untreated human waste. So food is the #1 resource we need to integrate, and that's one of the premises of the Biennale in urban infrastructure, just like we integrate other main infrastructures like roads and automobiles. In order to feed the growing population within the next decades, we need to increase food production in cities by 70%, and the solution is not to change the practices only in the periphery by exacerbating urban sprawl as it is. If we would do that, it would drive the destruction of natural habitats even further, a major cause for disease and infection, which some researchers assume that this is linked to the current pandemic. And it also leads to the loss of biodiversity and deforestation. So the objective in this research is to integrate food production within urban infrastructure systems. Another fact is only 2% of the valuable biological nutrients in food, byproducts, and organic waste is composted or otherwise upcycled and valorized to create new value. Almost nothing is repurposed to become new nutrients and useful products. So just think of the equivalent of 6 garbage trucks of edible food is lost or wasted every single second globally. We need to evolve these linear models of production and consumption towards more circular models that reduce impact and generate new value. Architecture, we believe, is the most important platform to enable these paths and directions for circular economies. So overall, with the Biennale, we were hoping to develop a proactive stance on architecture's expressive capacity to perform circular operations, to urge new forms of localization and the design of circular economies, to explore architectural strategies of local production and self-sufficiency, and to integrate in the built environment operations that use byproducts of urban life, establishing circular systems that aim to limit material and resource loss. The competition as part of that main framework starts from a very simple hypothesis, which is a question by philosopher Timothy Morden. When you think of where your waste goes, your world starts to shrink. And in that light, the circular block competition explores architecture's expressive capacity to convert waste to energy or matter via circular operations from the micro scale to the macro scale. Through the design of an urban unit that operates as a circular system in its resources and its economy protocols, as well as in the cycling of its materials, the aim of circular block is to define new productive and socially cohesive urban models that question the traditional linear and discrete consumption and production systems in cities. With comparable numbers in the built environment in different geographic regions, architecture's response to the climate emergency through alternative design, construction, and operational models is critical. The question was, how can microbial fuel units, anaerobic digesters, bacteria tanks, green cultivations, algae units, and other building elements be retrofitted to existing housing units and the building block as a whole, so as not only to function as an engineering infrastructure, but also as inhabitable space? What are the aesthetic questions of infrastructure, and how can such questions be instrumentalized to foster a creative design process? So we operated in the competition at 3 different scales, and we invited participants to consider Tallinn's Landsnamai district as a territory to investigate design strategies that allow urban blocks to produce food for inhabitants, to generate required energy partially off the grid, and to use waste for generating energy or products, to increase urban density using demolition waste, or implement blockchain technology for locally managing energy or material resources, among other possibilities. So you see here the three different scales that the participants could operate upon, and on which the foundation of this logic was founded: the apartment block, the urban block, and the microregion. And I'm going to speak quite extensively on the history of the microregion in Estonia just shortly. So we had this diagram where each one of the scales was paired or correlated with one of the themes that we asked the participants to address: food, energy, waste, and matter. So participants could choose any of the three scales or operate cross-referencing the different scales to address one or more of these topics in retrofitting the urban blocks of Landsnamai's microregions. The circular block asked participants to develop an ideological as well as a materialist position to questions of recycling, and to carry this position through the design of their proposals. From the micro scale investigating material conversions to the macro scale investigating the dynamics of urban exchange and environmental flows, participants were encouraged to investigate strategies and models for recirculating matter and energy based on principles of distribution and localization. And here I will delve a little bit into the history of microregions in Tallinn as the kind of base research on which we founded the kind of competition premise. So Landsnamai is Tallinn's largest housing district, and it is home to approximately 1/4 of the city's population at large, with prefabricated panel housing blocks. A housing suburb to Tallinn, Landsnamai was constructed during the Soviet occupation from 1973 until Estonia regained independence in the 90s, with the aim of housing workers' community to nearby factories and the city center. It is the largest and newest of the three housing districts of Tallinn. Mustamäe was constructed from 1962 to 1973, and Väike Õismäe from 1971 to 1975. While its construction spanned many years, Lasnamäe remained unfinished. Its captivating hallmark tramway in the Lania Channel, extended from Eliel Saarinen's 1913 original city master plan, was never built. Other non-residential amenities, such as neighborhood and regional centers, were never constructed, and public spaces and parks faced disinvestment. Today, as the city's largest district, and with a steadily increasing population, Lasnamäe's capacity for growth is limited by its aging housing stock, lack of amenities associated with a shortage economy during its construction, as well as persisting socioeconomic segregation. Tallinn's population in the last 2 decades has grown significantly, but with significant socioeconomic asymmetries in different districts of the city. According to geographers Anneli Karik and Tit Tamaru, in the 2000s, economic inequality in the Tallinn regional district skyrocketed and continues to persist today. The 2010 study, which has since been built upon in further research, found that new construction developments outside the city housed more higher income households, while urban housing districts, including Lasnamäe, had a wider concentration of lower income people. While developmental pressure has been pushed construction beyond municipal boundaries to meet the demand for single family housing, the need for housing I didn't understand what that was. Is there an issue with the presentation?
No, that's okay. Continue, please.
Oh, okay. I thought somebody that couldn't hear or something. Okay, so I'm continuing. While developmental pressure has pushed construction beyond municipal boundaries to meet the demand for single-family housing, the need for housing in more affordable districts has since become increasingly urgent. Beyond economic segregation, divisions have also occurred on the basis of language and ethnicity. Lasnamäe is home to a large number of ethnic Russians and other ethnicities, as well as an increasingly aging population. Despite some efforts to alleviate these asymmetries, socioeconomic segregation continues, thus amplifying the need to address the problems of a decaying housing stock, mobility, and access to amenities and resources. For the purposes of the circular block vision competition, participants were asked to focus directly on the Lania microrayon. The microrayon, and you see 11 microrayons as part of the Lasnamäe district here from the archives of Tallinn City Planning Development, as they were originally conceived, is a semi-self-sufficient agglomeration of housing and amenities meant to serve approximately 6,000 to 10,000 residents. Lania was one of the first of 11 microrayons that was constructed as part of the Lasnamäe master plan, making it one of the oldest areas constructed with the most commonly used planning and architectural strategies of the 1960s. Today, Lania houses 25,000 people and faces many of the concerns commonly affecting Soviet-era developments listed, including poor housing stock and accessibility. There has been considerable work done by local organizations to build community and alleviate these issues, though these needs continue to become more pressing as buildings deteriorate and developmental pressures become stronger, particularly as the area is subject to stigmatization. For example, in the distant future, Lania is adjacent to proposed developments, including a hospital to the north and a transit hub to the south, making the need for thoughtful, sensitive, and sustainable changes to the built environment even more pressing. Here you see some of the kind of original proposals. This is the planning of the second and third districts of Lasnamäe in Tallinn by a proposal in 1974 by architects Mark Port, Irina Raud, and Oleg Semchugov and Tina Nigul. And as part of that proposal, you see here one of the iconic drawings of that era that established as a post-war strategy to address the housing crisis and to provide a master planned and self-sufficient neighborhood unit, creating high quality of life. And this was the intention in this competition. But going a little bit further into how we have constructed the organization of this competition today, we were interested in developing a program, and we were developing this program during the COVID-19 pandemic and became increasingly interested to the notion of the microrayon, the residential microdistrict of the former Soviet Union, particularly related to new forms of localization within a confined domestic radius. And this has happened during lockdowns in Europe. And one of the ideas that we kind of conceptually related the microrayon with is the 15-minute city, which was popularized by the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, and it became part of her re-election campaign, resonating with several other urban environments. Well, at the same time, this kind of idea of the 15-minute walkable city reflected in many ways the fragility of our production processes, the hubris of ceaseless growth and endless mobility, and finally, our accountability for how we occupy the planet. The 15-minute city, which was again popularized by Anne Hidalgo, was inspired by French-Colombian scientist Carlos Moreno. And in this light, it proposes a city where of 5-minute neighborhoods, also known as complete communities or walkable neighborhoods, denoting a return to a local way of life. So we correlated this idea, which became very resonant during the pandemic, with the kind of former Soviet microrayon that included all, not only housing, but also different amenities and programs like school, housing, commerce, and social space to create a self-sufficient community that could be complete in its livelihood. The precedents for the urban model of the microrayon are many, and here you see only a few on the screen. The structure as a large housing block providing basic amenities closely resembles Clarence Perry's neighborhood planning unit from 1929. Designed by Perry to act as a framework for urban planners to design self-contained neighborhoods in industrializing cities, the neighborhood unit continues to be utilized and is linked with a contentious movement of new urbanism. Other precedents include some Siam modernist models like Ernst May and Mark Stump's work for proposals in the USSR in the 1930s, which were in fact experiments in microrayon developments with replicable block structures. Despite this being a Soviet type of development, it bears many similarities to form of modernist planning across the globe. The original aim of the microrayon was to advance the quality of urban life and to make it available to all. It must be noted, however, that microrayon housing regions often housed in Estonia Russian-speaking and highly educated people under the Soviet regime as a means to establish a larger Russian population. The remnants of this still exist today. A large part of the Russian-speaking population resides in the microrayon districts of Estonia. It should also be noted that the housing was more directly directed towards the upper middle classes to attract highly skilled workers to cities and not necessarily to house Estonians or lower classes. In Estonia, some of the most wealthy communities outside of the city were collective farms that accrued wealth in various forms under the Soviet regime. The quality of the microrayon housing, however, was quite poor across the USSR. People were highly critical of the poor quality, and there are, for example, popular Estonian songs from the 70s that poke all the walls being very thin and other such details. Here you see another example from the Tallinn Architecture Biennale in 2013 with the theme Recycling Socialism, which examined the area of Vaik-Oismäe, a sub-district in Tallinn that was taken as the site for the vision competition, and the participants were asked to redesign the center of the microrayon to provide more public amenities or housing for communities. And these are some recent projects. Before I get into the results of the competition, by researchers at the Estonian Academy of Arts in 2016, specifically Andrea Tamm and Anne Press. It was a master thesis called Urban Barley Field, which imagined new forms of agriculture that could benefit from abandoned and vacant spaces. The corridor and empty spaces have been a seminal space for artists and architects to explore and speculate upon, even though generally modernist buildings are associated with negative images of the former Soviet Union and the occupation, but also economic and social issues of contemporary and neoliberal Estonia. And here you see other images from this kind of attempt to populate these corridors with urban agriculture, and a kind of event in 2016 celebrating the idea that the project introduced the ecological concerns and interspecies relationships as a new dimension based on which to reimagine the future of the microrayons. There are several projects also across Estonia that attempt to reimagine different kinds of more ecological infrastructures, in formerly industrial spaces or sites of Soviet extraction, including a water sports park and a quarry, a ski hill and an ash landfill, and a sort of ecological connector park in Tallinn. The legacy of the microregion was really the important basis for this competition to reimagine the infrastructure with all its abandonment, as well as the lack of social and economic protocols to foster community initiatives. With the circular block competition, the aim was to consider both the history of the microregion as well as its contemporary issues and pressures to support imagined futures and spaces premised around circular systems in their resources and economy protocol, as well as the cycling of materials. We received several submissions from the micro to the macro scale, and participants were generally encouraged to investigate strategies and models of matter recirculation, energy generation, partially off the grid, based on principles of localization and distribution. Basically, we saw as a kind of general theme, the microregion as an organizational vessel that enabled the flow of materials, ideas, and people. Yet we were also intrigued in how technical solutions may have political ramifications and provide vital spaces for urban communities. So this was the jury of the competition. We had Vinnie Maas, which is very well known. He's a principal of MVRDV in Rotterdam. Kaidi Poldoa, who's the head of the Spatial Planning and Competence Center at the city of Tallinn. Benedetta Tagliabue, who is the director of Miralles Tagliabue Architects in Barcelona. Tumas Thomas, who is a professor at the Estonian Academy of Arts, and Veronica Valk-Siska, the advisor of Estonian Ministry of Culture. And here you see, unfortunately, I can't disclose the names of the winners, as I was told by the organizers of the Tallinn Biennale, but you see the projects here. And this is the first prize, Dynamic Equilibrium City, which was a very interesting proposal of gradually replacing the microregion with a kind of new structure of wood houses coming from the forest. And gradually, as this new neighborhood would grow, the kind of debris of the microregions would be integrated in the new development. So it proposed basically an urban system that can be circulated with local resources by combining three scales of circulation: the suburban forests of Tallinn, Lana, and urban building resources. Specifically, it contained two different proposals. The first one was a construction process in which the entire Lana is built gradually over a period of 40 years in accordance with the growth cycle of the adjacent forest, and then repeatedly decomposed and renewed as it becomes old. The second proposal was to design a method that allows for easy decomposing and rebuilding. While reconstructing the network of various actors in Tallinn, the materials that exist in Tallinn would be incorporated into the circulation. The architecture itself will continue to transform and respond to the challenges of the time through repeated decomposition, movement, and combination. The second prize, called Super Naval, proposed an urban game where participants could trade their sources and help create an environmental shift on a personal level, shared in social media, by circulating their ideas of regeneration and housing in a scoring system in social media. This in turn would start to form an efficient and green urban block. So you see here a kind of instance of how this game would be played. Different infrastructures would be added, and these kinds of gradual additions would result in a kind of the reconfiguration of the entire area. The third prize, Bioedible Talent, proposed infrastructures to become ecological corridors where bees and mushrooms continuously exchange information along the street, and entire edible neighborhoods contribute to soil permeability and healthy air. So it was really a project of interspecies development and interspecies equity. Along these lines, vertical farms and gardens are placed on the blind facades of the buildings as containers of primary goods, but also as creative design and exchange of know-how, culture, and innovation. On the ground floor, there's a proposed market. On the upper floors, the edible cultivation and knowledge dialogue with each other, since the waste products become raw material to create new products through innovative processes. On the side, there are biogas digesters, and the organic waste of the building goes up to the last floor for energy cogeneration and storage, after being treated in tanks with fungi that are placed underground. And I'm going to briefly also show some of the honorable mentions of the competition. This is one called Choreography of Porosities, and it proposes a web of creeks that become nutrient lines and revive the former main streets into ecological pulsations. Nutrient catchers collect the flows of interwoven quartz with new metabolic qualities. The Landsnamai Canal with the bays and the cable car system transforms the highway to an ecological spine towards the old city, fed by cloudbursts, ocean runoff, and gray water influx. A porous Landsnamai, a circular territory, demonstrates how a city can feed and sustain itself, celebrating its coexistence with different life forms. Another honorable mention proposes to reconsider the notion of the urban void to become a productive space that generates community resilience and fosters circular economies. By eliminating massive parking lots, the proposal brings the module filled with productive functions generated by the community and for the community itself. The concept consists of generative productive modules ranging from environmental equilibrium, sustainable energy, and community well-being. The configuration of the productive functions is determined by solar radiation, the ages and types of the population, and the physical layout of the block. This is a strategy to create not only the community scale, self-sufficient resilience, but also a larger mutualism between the different blocks. This is a very interesting project that also received an honorable mention that proposes a remanufacturing, like a living hub of fabrication that is composed of repurposed industrial buildings, where materials are removed from existing buildings and biomatter from the landscape and are processed and stored. Adjacent, there's an urban farm and a food market that grows and distributes food and provides a strong social focus for the district. At the roadside and adjacent to new transit, a multi-purpose facility assembled from a lightweight frame and redundant building components begins life as a gathering of small, highly visible interventions, a micro-civic belvedere, a super graphic treatment of the bridges, events, and community projects in the wasted space of the cutting, but grows to contain administrative functions associated with the circular project. And very briefly, there are two more honorable mentions. This was about education. So it proposed a kind of new infrastructure network called the Educational Social Network as part of the Lituania microregion. And it was based on different residential districts providing a convenient non-motorized systems. And finally, this honorable mention was called Next Door and suggested a vision of the blocks that understood as a set of vibrant urban elements that are attached to the facade, prefabricated structures, and extend the housing to the outdoors and create different frames for novel hybrid forms of cohabitation communities and community sharing. So to conclude here, I want to say that we were very interested in how these ideas of edibility, food generation, self-sufficiency, but also new different models of kinship, interspecies alliances and cohabitation would present themselves in housing developments, particularly in deteriorated housing developments in the city of Tallinn. And in many ways, in the last decade, the mainstream idea of what we call a smart city has elevated notions of optimization through technologies, while somehow it has under-prioritized essential issues of urban ecology, architectural metabolism, and social inclusion. During the pandemic, we observed the rise of projects and initiatives that have contributed to a significant shift towards systems of care, as well as decentralized systems of production and consumption in cities. So the goal with this work was to create different kind of a pool of proposals that address this mindset shift. Initially conceived for the Soviet microdistricts of Lansnamai and Tallinn, the competition's novel and scalable proposals stand at the core of reinventing urban centers as productive and socially cohesive metabolic systems. And I want to thank you so much for listening and for the invitation.
Thank you, Lydia, very much. These are really challenging proposals, and I'm really eager to hear what kind of discussions. Maybe there were some discussions in the wide public how those projects were perceived, because I think that for many they are shocking ideas, and for many they would seem really utopian. And I think that this is also one of the aims of such events as biennales and other festivals, just to raise awareness and invite people to think. However, was there any feedback from the, so that we call normal people that are not architects?
We are not there yet to receive feedback, just because we have basically a symposium at the Tallinn Biennale where we're going to invite the district to display these ideas and have a roundtable discussion. At this point, we just, I'm sharing the results of the competition, which whose authors have not even been announced yet. So I think this is a discussion that we're really looking forward to, how the kind of local community will react to these proposals. I think the jury did an extraordinary job, and it was fascinating to witness the process. We were interested in ideas that actually could potentially be realized at one point or another. A lot of these ideas seem utopian, but I think that a lot of the projects that I also saw before my presentation manifest a lot of these ideas. The project in Copenhagen, for example, with these gardens. So a lot of the ideas that were proposed for the competition kind of have a range between utopian to reality. So I hope to continue the conversation with the community in September in Tallinn.
Yes, and we will follow the results of the Biennale, and the best of luck with the
please
with
come.
The event. Yes, we will come. We will be there.
Okay.
Thank you, Lydia,
thank you so much
for this conference. And now we'll move to the next presentation coming from Greece. It will be done by architect Olga Venețianu. She's an architect PhD, and she's working at YAP Architects, and she's also an adjunct professor at University of West Attica in Greece. And Olga will make a presentation about green urban quarter pilot project in Athens, Greece. So dear Olga, the floor is yours.
Hello, hi, nice to see you. You can hear me well, I suppose.
Yes.
All right, share. Okay, so let me hide these. All right, so you can see the screen well, I guess.
Yes, everything works fine.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be presenting this Green Urban Quarter pilot project that was developed in various phases. I will explain all about that. We were sort of one of the 4 architectural practices that were invited to make a proposal at an initial stage, along with Katerina Zveis-Piropoulou, Mr. Kostikas, and Tobias Architects. So the idea was that we should be making an energy-saving renovation of a large-scale apartment, which was a council flat in the West Athens area. And the idea was to also involve the inhabitants. So these are council flats that were made in Athens, that they basically had no insulation whatsoever in the walls or the roof. So also due to the low income of the tenants, it's actually quite difficult to maintain and to deal with monthly expenses. So let me tell you a bit about the location of the project. The area is called Agia Varvara. It's in West Athens, which is basically, West Athens is the industrial area of Athens. If you look at the map, this is the center, and this is the area of Agia Varvara. It's around here, and here is the actual block, the actual square. To have a better idea for those who have actually visited Athens, here is the port of Piraeus, where all the ships leave to various islands and other destinations. So this is the west area of the city, which is basically the main industrial area. So the idea was that there were 4 building blocks, as I said before. The idea was that we would make a proposal for this one here. And according to our findings and results, the municipality would proceed to the other 3. So these were 4-story buildings with sort of mirror type house plans. They had sort of 72 apartments in total, and an external space in the middle. So the project stakeholders were the Ministry of the Environment. The funding came from Greek and EU sources. And a key point in the whole project was the Center of Renewable Energy Sources and Saving, which is a center of accreditations and processes and various other sort of information organization body regarding renewable energy sources and consultation. And this is a sort of government, in the wider government sector. And the implementation and operation of the whole project was coordinated by the local municipality of Agia Varvara. So basically the idea was the project was that in the first phase, we were going to insulate the building envelope. Like I said before, there was no insulation at all in these buildings. And trying to reduce the energy needs of the building. And so we would make a thermal insulation in the walls and the roof, and we will replace the windows, and we will add external shading. In the second phase of the project, these reduced energy needs will be covered by renewable energy sources like geothermal heat pumps, photovoltaic systems, solar panels for warm water. There was going to be, it's being installed now, a smart metering system that is not doesn't have anything to do with the bills or the electricity bills. It's going to be installed just to monitor the energy performance and the energy needs of the building. And of course, there's going to be a landscaping in the interior space of the block, so as to improve the local, the microclimate. So in parts of the, the body of the renewable energy sources, they were going to use certain energy performance guidelines. And the goal was to actually reduce the primary energy consumption about 60%. And also they wanted to sort of communicate this whole project to the supply chain and the various industries that produce installation materials and other related materials, so they could be sponsors of the project. There was going to be an extensive quality control of the products and of the implementation. And of course, as I said before, an active involvement by the inhabitants. So initially there was an energy audit in the building, which as expected was, very bad. It was like almost the lowest possible. And then there was a call for tenders and selection of sponsor companies. So I have to stress here that the first phase of the project, it was basically based on sponsorship. I mean, we as an office, along with the other 3 offices, we didn't receive any sort of fee for this proposal. And also the materials were sponsored by the companies. They were basically given without any charge. And also the actual building process, the work hours, they were also covered by the respective companies. So basically the whole first part of the project was done without any fee. So our design was based on this very limited sort of situation, and we tried to make the simplest and the most effective possible proposal. So we basically played with this flat surface and the colors of the various windows, and also we had added this shading system. I have to stress here that in Greece, because of the quality of the light, the actual form of the buildings is very clear. The shadows are very strong. So this is a shadow. The shadow is also an extra building material in this part of the world. So this also added to the very clean and minimal aesthetic of the design. So you can see a before and after picture of the building block. And here is the elevation, the south elevation. And here's this shading system. So another photo. And here are the sponsors of the project. We had some, mineral wool insulation for the wall, and also quite interesting material was a self-cleaning silicone-based external render that sort of reacts with the sun, the solar rays, and sort of produces a type of a type of a drop, like water or something like that, so that actually is cleaning the external rendering surface. So this is the inverted roof that was also sponsored. And here are some images from the final project. So after this first phase, which was done in 2010, I mean, we started working on this project on 2010, and I believe it was almost finished in 2012. The idea was that there was going to be some technical guidelines for the other 3 buildings and for many other buildings of a similar situation in the area. So after your proposal for us, your invitation for us to participate in this conference, I sort of went over there to see what's going on, and I saw that they were also continuing with the other 3 buildings. And I have to say here that we were never informed about this. We just discovered, after your invitation, we just went to see there, the situation, what's going on. And also we discovered that another group of engineers is going to do the other 3 buildings, and they're going to change also the external shading system with this movable panel system, perforated sliding panels, but I don't have any more details on that. So basically, after the completion of the first building, there were a lot of dissemination activities on the press, on TV, on various YouTube videos. I have to say, by talking to the mayor and the various engineers that were working for the local municipality, the biggest challenge of this building was basically to make the renovation while people were still living in the buildings. This took a lot of negotiations, and also there was a lot of the local residents were not particularly, they were quite cautious in the beginning, because they were afraid they were, the project was going to be left unfinished, and they would be left without windows and things like that. So this took a lot of discussions and a lot of effort from the part of the local engineers to convince them to cooperate. Also, after there was some questionnaires before the renovation, monitoring the, income status and social and income status of the residents, and of course the energy characteristics and of each apartment and the type of appliances they use and all of that. I have to stress here that before the actual action, this project, many of the apartments didn't have any type of heating. There was central heating only in 2 of the 4 building blocks, and it wasn't always working. And some of the apartments didn't even have hot water. So this whole project was something very important. But like I said, although it was really important and it was going to help, improve significantly, significantly the life of the inhabitants, they were extremely cautious in the beginning, and that was something that is worth noting. So in the outputs, we had this. The Energy Sources Institute had a very good database of standards and best practices, which they have issued in guidelines right now. There was a lot of use of local human resources for the actual construction stages. Many people who lived in the buildings were employed during the construction process for the actual construction process. There was a very interesting collaboration between us designers and the energy experts, which was very informing and educational for us. The whole process created these protocols and methods of collaboration that are very useful. And the other thing that is worth noting, but I'm not sure what we can do about that, is that there was a lot of legal procedures and problems with the funding. As I said before, this project started in 2010, and right now it's in the construction stage still, because there was a lot of there was a period in between that there was no funding, so it was sort of left it was left halfway. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Olga, very much. I think that your presentation discloses the very different contexts and conditions where the architects that are dealing with innovation have to work. And as we have seen from different presentations, you have different starting positions when you are entering these kind of projects, regarding the financing, regarding the power of an architect, also regarding the attitude of the inhabitants. And every time you have to deal with some different contexts. So it is good to know that the solutions that we are talking now in this conference, they cannot be just to copy paste, because every time you have to deal with some different conditions. So thank you very much.
Yes, it was extremely educational for us, the whole process, from every aspect. And, thanks again for the invitation and for this.
Thank you, Olga, and I hope that these projects don't stop because of the lack of money, and you can continue. And now let me present the last presentation of today's conference, the presentation from France. And I would invite architect Marine de la Guérande, a founder of Think Tank Architecture from Paris, to present a project of Blueberry Hill rehabilitation and extension of Les Myrtilles condominium in Annecy. So Marine, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Up. Is this okay this way? Could you see my screen?
Yes, it works perfectly.
Okay, so hello everybody. It's a great pleasure and honor to share the floor with such talented colleagues who are committed to the profession and the influence of architecture all over Europe. Being an architect is eminently political. The present times shows us the social responsibility of the architect is really needed for the men and women whose living environment we designed, for our planet whose resources are not unlimited, and for our children to whom we owe to live a better world. This is far being one. However, each of our workpiece is an opportunity to stand for what's important. After such a dense and interesting day, I will try to keep it exciting with a quite modest project. So let's go to Blueberry Hills, which is located in the French Alps foothills. This project can be seen as a manifesto of our office approach, because we are working by making places as spaces to live with an attention to the comfort for all. Our projects are mainly designed from the point of view of the inhabitants, and we try to be generous. We work doing with, because for an equivalent financial scope, our choice is always the lowest carbon cost, taking into consideration the life cycle of the building, capitalizing with the carbon of the past, and preserving the legacy of an unrecognized patrimoine. We also use to say that we are doing better with less, and giving a really important place to the living in the heart of the project. It means the humans, but also the fauna on the floor. And we have strong ambitions in terms of sustainable environment. And finally, we are working, doing things together, because alone, architects, we are nothing. We need partners, clients, and the inhabitants. So let me introduce you the context. The city we are looking at, is Annecy, a city under London pressure. This is the site project, which is located in Mettey area. Mettey was a smaller city in the neighborhood of Annecy, and they have merged in 2017. The municipality is 126 inhabitants, and it always increased because mainly of the closeness to Switzerland and Geneva. And it's really less expensive to live in France than in Switzerland. The particularity of this site, it's an entrance point to the city, and it's located near a motorway. You have also the train line on the south, and the site is designed by the Fier, which is a small river, and there is a corridor with important slope. So it's like a green corridor. And the building we are talking about, which name is Les Myrtilles, so Blueberry. Blueberry is the name of the building. It's this building. You can see that in this context, there is the natural corridor, a residential tissue with a lot of small houses and less collective housing. And here you can find an industrial area. This competition was launched by a local cultural institution, which is the Council for Architecture, Urbanism and Environment, in partnership with Habitat Mont Blanc, which is a social housing operator, which is the main shareholder of this co-ownership. So you see actual pictures of this building, which was built in the 70s, beginning of the 70s. So it's rectangular with 36 housing facing the south, and then there is a slope. Here it was a sunny day, so you can see to the Alps. And there is a very beautiful, beautiful view, like if you were in the countryside. Inside, views from inside of the flats, because this building, which is not very appreciated by the neighborhood because of its design, has a lot of qualities for the inhabitants. All the flats are be oriented to the streets and also to the south. There is beautiful views, balconies, natural environment, but the 4 floors building has no lift. It lacks of thermal insulation and a lot of comfort comparing to the actual standard. So the main residents' request was to bring it up to current standard, but of course, like a Christmas wish list, with the least amount of money to invest. So we were three teams invited to compete. And in fine, we were asked to find a solution, how to make this project possible, and how to find an economical balance. Here you can see that this building is really thin. There is an access for the vehicles going down the slope and distributing all the garages which are in the basement of this building. All this actual garden is not really used by the inhabitants. It's only for the pleasure of the view. But the plot is a co-ownership property. So that is the luck for this project. And you can also see that in the neighborhood, the other collective housing are quite low buildings with balconies, pitched roof. They are designed like houses. So the question of surelevating this building was quite a difficult option to reach and to defend in this context. So our proposal was to work on with the landscape and develop the project living in the slope. In fact, the street entrance, which is the level 0, distribute 4 levels of flats, but is superposed to 2 levels of parking. And then you have the green garden, which was a real potential for us to develop a new extension. And by creating this extension, we wanted to also to work with a distance, I mean, an in-between, because the actual inhabitants of the first floor were really frightened that after having lived maybe for 30 years with no one in front of them, they would have no views, no sun, and so it was really important to separate a possible extension from the existing building. Our intervention develops in 3 ways. First, inside the buildings. I will develop it later. In addition to the existing building, and also in juxtaposition to this building. So, for example, you have some little scheme of this street floor. In red, these are the parts where we wanted to demolish or restructure the spaces, and on the right you have the proposal. For example, we are near the French Alps. The climate is quite cold. You were entering in very narrow, small halls with no SAS, nearly no view. And after the SAS, there was some cellars, but which were not used because each flat had also an additional parking box, which was closed. The staircase were quite narrow and not well ventilated. And next to this staircase and cellars and halls, you had some storage for the bikes, which were totally empty because all the bikes were stored in the garage. So we thought that there was a potential, and this pattern is repeated 4 times on the ground floor with a game of symmetry. So our first intervention was to redesign the street floor, creating some large and lightly and transparent hall with a real SAS, redesign the access and the organization of the staircase, make it a through hall in order to reach and distribute the new building in the south, and also to gain some spaces with the bike storage. So if we zoom on it, you can clearly see here the larger entrance, the new staircase, and the ancient bike storage, which can be renovated in studios, but which respond to disabled people standard. Then on the south side, we worked on extra space. Indeed, all the flats had some balconies, but which were so narrow that finally you couldn't do anything on it. Just maybe to stand and enjoy the view, but you couldn't put a table and 2 seats just to have breakfast, which was quite a pity. The particularity of these flats also was to have a small dryer room with a natural ventilation accessible from the kitchen, but this space was also blocking the staircase space from the facade, so there was a lack of ventilation in the stairs. So we proposed to redesign everything, have a new stair next to a lift, and by a a small extension of this facade by thickening it of 60 centimeters, which is quite small. We can enlarge the balconies in order to have a real space to put a table, and we recreate some dryer and scullery accessible from the kitchen. We had also a problem of image of this building, because it has been partly renovating, but not with a global intervention. Some resident has changed the windows, so everything was not the same, and it also has a very 70s image. And because of the lack of insulation, of course, there was a waste of energy. So we worked on the global envelope, putting a new insulation, changing all the joinery, also responding to new safety fire security rules. And we offered to redesign and change the whole image of this building in order to offer a modernized image, if we can use this expression. Because it's funny, when we spoke with the residents, they were quite attached to their flats, their living spaces, their environment, but they all agreed that they didn't like at all the image of their buildings. They felt it was old and from bad quality, and it was not agreeable for them to give their address and to invite people for the first time at this place. So they were really keen to change the image of their building. This is the different stages of the refurbishment. Donc, first, we intervene on the staircase and the dryers in order to build new staircase and a lift. Then we remove the protection from the balcony and add the new steel structure in order to extend the southern facade, and also the structure which will support the bridges over the small vehicular access road in order to reach the new building. We enlarge the balconies and remove the old joinery. Then we put new joineries, windows, things like that. And for the balconies, we also offered to the residents to have two options, depending the way they wanted to leave the space. Two options for the dryer and the scullery, if it was a more technical space or more a living space. So different design for the windows, and also for the balcony, if it was an open balcony, like a terrace, like before, or if they wanted to make it more like a winter garden. And this kind of options was important for us in order to give people a way to appropriate the project, to make their own choices, and also in order to have a facade which is not monotonous, which is more rhythmic and animated. And on this image, you can see that the south facade of the building has already changed a lot, and you can also see the variety of the windows pattern. Then the extension, I've explained that in order to finance the global refurbishment of the existing building, we offered to build an extension in the slope. So this extension was placed lower in the garden in order not to be something negative concerning the view, the sun, the wind of the existing building, and with a roof terrace and some things that may make the project quite disappear in the landscape for the actual inhabitants. This extension to the south is made of 9 flats in this proposal, which are, you can see them on this image, and they are totally invisible from the streets. So it was also important to make people and the neighborhood understand that we can densify the site, but not giving them this impression of density, making this density disappear. This is a principle of extension. It's simple and efficient construction method, mainly prefabricated with a steel structure which adapts to the slope, and then a prefabricated wooden box with a small parking lot, and each flat is like is a duplex, and it's like inverted duplex. So you arrived by the upper floor, and then you go down from the living space to the night spaces. You can see here the plan of this flat. Sorry. And the achieved goals of this global project finally was improvement of the thermal and acoustic comfort, because we have treated the 4 facades of the building existent. We have created 4 new staircases with 4 lifts, so 100% of the existing flat became accessible. Because of a small game of Tetris, all the cellars and spaces we have lose in the phase 1 were rebuilt after. We have gained spaces with the extension of balconies and drying rooms. We have calculated an improvement of energy consumption, gaining approximately 50% on heating and domestic hot water. There was also safety improvements with the firewall, smoke extractions, and a lot of small things like that, which are not to the actual standard. We have created 13 new flats, so 9 in the extension and 4 in the existing building. The project was thought to be phased, so because of course we couldn't ask to the inhabitants to move during the work. And we always had an economical approach, really serious, in order to control the economical balance. But this economical balance, with only 9 new flats in the extension, it was not sufficient. So in a second phase, we were asked to work on a further densification to reach an economic balance. So in this image is the declination of the first pattern, the first approach. But instead of 9 new flats, we reach 17 new flats. And we can also develop more diversity in the typology of flats. It's really a variation on the same pattern, because developing the extension more on the eastern part of the land plot, where the slope is more important. In fact, instead of having 2 levels of building in the slope, you can reach 3 levels. So this is the way we reach the amount of flats. We also we have calculated the pre-balance sheet operation, because of course you have 36 co-owners. One is a social housing operator, and 35 are private co-owners. So you have to be very careful. They have not the same agendas. They are not eligible to the same subsides. So we had to do the demonstration of expenses, revenues, and how they can finance this operation. The expenses, on one hand, they are mainly the cost of work for energy renovation, accessibility, extensions of balconies, transformation of entrance hall, refurbishment of the new studios, construction of 17 flats, and all the outdoor facilities and adaptations. Revenues mainly come from the selling of the new flats, so 17 new flats, and public subsides in order to improve accessibility and thermic insulation. For example, these 2 lines, Habiter mieux CroPro, which is a co-ownership better living, if you want a translation, and also this one, these are public subsides for private co-ownership, condominium. And so when you calculate total cost of expenses and total revenues, there is a remain to be financed by the co-ownership trustee of €500,000, VAT excluded, of course. So we tried to demonstrate them that, in fact, it was not very heavy. Indeed, $500,000, it makes an average share of 14,500 per dwelling. So it represents an investment of less than 1,000 per year on a 15-year basis. 15-year basis, which is the usual normal time to make it profitable. And the main part of this this amount of money to be financed is covered by the energy cost saving, because of the better insulation and the changement of domestic hot water production. So finally, it represents an investment of €733 per dwelling per year on a 15-year basis. So after we had to be very, pedagogical in order to explain to each private owner what were the other financial leverages they were eligible, they could be eligible to, because in France we had a lot of different ways to help people, but it needs a little bit of knowledge and to navigate between the different institutions. For example, you can have a zero interest loan between 10,000 and 30,000 euros that you have to pay back in 15 years maximum. So this kind of zero interest loan is dedicated to this kind of operation. There are also a lot of tax credits for housing improvement, also energy supplier subsides, exemptions sometimes from property tax, and also some specific grants from local authorities. Last but not least, there is a reduced VAT on most of the renovation cost of work, which is 5.5% instead of 20%. And of course, this pre-balance sheet operation cannot calculate the property gain on resale, because when you improve your building, your apartment, your accessibility, your comfort, and also your energy consumption, of course, you improve your patrimoine, and if you have to sell it, you sell it more expensive. So I will thank you for your attention. This small project is not another example, 100% publicly financed, and it's not a really important budget, but and whatever the example, it's not a standard, but a pilot and affordable project, because we really think that each operation is unique. To conclude, and being honest, the main difficulty on this project remains in the fact that between social housing operator and private co-owners, they have different agendas and different concerns, and also among the co-owners, for example, families or older people, resident owners or leaseholders, they have not the same priorities. So for the moment, it's quite stuck. But the main interest in this project is about the approach and its replicability. I really think that this kind of events, with all the examples presented today, is the best way to convince reluctant clients. Demonstrating by examples, it's really very inspiring, and I really thank you for having invited us.
Thank you very much, Maureen, especially for the last part of your presentation, talking about those boring things like, budget lines that are really very important for these kinds of projects. And the architects are usually, not having energy for that. And this is really very important. And as you said, that these projects are challenging because of many reasons, not only because of the budget, but mainly it's about finding some consensus. I think that this is the most challenging part of this. It's not about ideas and creativity of architects, because I am sure, and what I saw from today's presentations, architects have all the creativity in the world and they can come up with some brilliant ideas. The hardest part is just to convince people to want what is best for them. And of course, by commenting and trying to convince what is best for people, architects have also to listen to the people and let them talk about what is best for them, and then somehow to find a consensus and some kind of compromise that would also bring some quality architecture. So I'm not going deeper into conclusions for today's conference, because I'm overwhelmed of the ideas and the information, but you will see those conclusions in Madrid Forum 2022. So once again, let me thank you for your intervention at today's conference. you will find the record of the conference at the Facebook page of Architects Association of Lithuania. So feel free to watch it again or to send a link to whoever you feel important. Also, I will remind to those who are listening to us that the projects that were presented today, they will present it as well at the exhibition. And the opening of the exhibition will happen on 16th of May during the Madrid Forum. So if you are there, please come and see the exhibition. And later, we will share this exhibition with the institutions in Europe, for example, if they are interested. So it could be a traveling exhibition. Feel free to contact us. And the third part of this event, it will be a book comprising of the examples that were shown today and also articles by researchers and probably some more information that was not presented today because of we have a limit of time and the limit of capacity of our brain to embrace information. So thank you once again for your inputs, and let's keep in touch, and hopefully I see you in Madrid, and if not, then probably we see each other in Tallinn Biennale probably this September. And if not, let's continue with this initiative and these projects, and let's try to make this sector of housing, which is very important especially for the vulnerable social group, going with the quality architecture. So thank you once again, and have a very nice week, and bye-bye for now.